So, not being one for a cohesive narrative even within one film, it's perhaps a surprise that Wong Kar-wai followed up In the Mood for Love with, well, something of a sequel. Sort of, but not quite, but may as well be.
Yeah.
And one that benefits from, though doesn't require having seen the earlier film. But he did just that with 2046, named for the number of the hotel room in which Chow and Su Li Jen collaborated on their martial arts story in the Mood for Love. Chow has returned to Hong Kong from Singapore, and we soon see that he is dealing with the failure of his ultimately chaste, well, possibly not, but I hadn't decided myself in the end of that film, but anyway, let's go with his ultimately chaste relationship with Su Li Jen and the loss of her, his great love, from his life by being a womanizer and, well, a bit of a prat where women are concerned. Though whether because of the likeability of Tony Leung, knowledge of the character from In the Mood for Love, or just because he's considerably better than many of the other men in Wong's films up until now, he still comes across as likeable and sympathetic. So having occasion to visit Hong Kong's Oriental Hotel after running into Days of Being Wild's Lulu/Mimi, he is struck by her room number, 2046, and asks the manager a few days later for that room. Currently unavailable, he's given the adjoining room 2047, and here he begins two very different relationships with two women who will take up residence next door. First is the elder daughter of the hotel owner, played by Faye Wong, who is in love with a Japanese, a relationship that won't be countenanced by her father, so Chow offers to play the go-between for their correspondence. They then begin a writing partnership, one of the products of which is a serial entitled 2046. After her is Ji Zhang's Bai Ling, a club hostess who, it is fairly heavily implied but never stated, is also a call girl. Chow begins a relationship with her, but for unclear reasons, though perhaps as some sort of self-defence or armour, he treats her very badly. Naturally, because healthy relationships don't yet exist in Wong Kar-wai's world, his being an asshat to her causes her to fall deeply in love with him, up until the point that she finally gets fed up and leaves. Chow attempts to reconcile his feelings, desires and pain through his story, 2046, set in that year and telling the tale of a young Japanese man who's the only passenger aboard a train full of beautiful, servile fembots. Their detachment and emptiness finally brings Chow to an epiphany about himself and his ability to love. All of this occurs, as I'm sure you by now expect, in a non-linear fashion, and a fairly incoherent one too. Wong's works are about mood and feeling far more than anything else. Well, mood, feeling, and cigarettes, smoking, and the combustion of tobacco products. But if you allow yourself to get lost in it, 2046 is a deeply affecting and rewarding film. Though the regret, heartache, loss, pain and poignancy have a good chance of stomping on your mood. As you might also expect, it's beautiful, with Wong's regular DP Christopher Doyle joined by Infernal Affairs photographer Lau Yu-fei and Quan Pung Lung, together creating a warm and rich world that at the same time feels distant and empty, which ought not to be possible. Some of the beautiful compositions even manage not to involve smoking, showing that Wong is prepared to grow as a filmmaker. Yes, I didn't actually write at length about this one, Craig, because I was very much in danger of saying it's really pretty, but it made me feel sad. Sad pretty. Trying to stretch that to 3 paragraphs.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And this is the only Wong Kar-wai film I've seen up to this point, despite my memory, which is normally reliable telling me otherwise. And I still think it's fantastic. It's not as... It didn't blow me away in the way In the Mood for Love did. But I still think it's just a really affecting film. And just looks great. I wonder if it perhaps suffered from watching in such close proximity to In the Mood for Love, though, because a lot of it, you could argue, is a bit like more of the same. And watching it so close to the previous film maybe does a bit of a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember, likewise, first Wong film I'd seen was 2046, and it did blow me away at the time, for much of the same reasons that In the Mood for Love blew me away at the time when I was watching it the first time around this, for this podcast. And I think you're probably on something there, Drew. I wasn't quite as enamoured with 2046 this time round, but I mean, it's cigarette papers between them, if we're honest. Really was again drawn into 2046 as well. The sort of conceit of the future story, the science fiction elements to it, kind of really do a great way of really emphasising that kind of Wong Kar-wai's more dreamlike construction of his plots and how that kind of draws together. So that kind of helps it in that regard, it being a bit more obtuse than is even normal for him. And I think all the same strengths apply as you've went through there. It looks beautiful, the characters are great, all the performances are fantastic, and again the characters are they're deep enough that it can be drawn into. They're not simplistic. Tony Leung's obviously acting like an absolute asshole for most of it, but at the same time he's for the most part being entirely honest in everything. He's upfront about everything. So it's a bit more morally complex, I think, than maybe some of his earlier works as well. And it just all works together. It all pulls together as well to be another fantastically enjoyable film, and is certainly in the contention within The Mood for Love for being his best work. So great stuff.
I don't have a great deal to add. I'm one of those people who has, I don't know why, but right from the point at which I started forming relationships, I have always been one of those people who finds romance in misery for some reason, and it's fairly easy to understand how that's a double-edged sword. But essentially, misery loves company, and I am that company, right? I'm at my happiest when I'm at my saddest, and that's a dichotomy that's taken me a long time to come to terms with. But there you go. And that's why I fell in love with 2046 immediately when I watched it all the way back then. And it's why I spent an absolute fortune importing a limited edition DVD copy back in...
Did you get the limited edition Korean one with the film cell in it?
Yes. That's
the one I have as well.
Yes, that's the one. And the whole time that I was waiting on that arriving, I kept saying to myself, please let the film cell be of Faye Wong. Please let the film cell be of Faye Wong. And it arrived, and I opened it up. The film cell was not just of Faye Wong, but it was of Faye Wong in exactly the scene I wanted it to be in. Because Faye Wong's hair in this movie is one of my favourite things in any movie ever. It is up there with Kurt Russell's hair in Tango and Cash.
That's high praise.
That's high hair.
I don't know. Don't know how else to convey it to you peeps. No, everything about this film, the sort of the lingering, it's not misery. The words escape me at the minute. Can't articulate myself very well on this one. Now, despite having had
ennui in this film,
yes, yeah, the sort of lingering ennui and the sort of. God, it's not a death of romance. It's the sort of acceptance at the onset that the romance is doomed, or just that again, that whole thing of just being happy, being miserable. It just permeates. Fatalism. There you go. Knew there was a word for it. The fatalism of it is what appealed to me initially. And visually it is absolutely overwhelming. You actually hit the nail on the head for me, Drew, before when you said about somehow it manages to be warm but also distant. That's absolutely the thing that appeals most to me about it. And yeah, this was my first Wong Kar-wai film, and it's been maybe not top 10. I know that it's pointless putting numbers on lists, but maybe like a top 20 film for me ever since it came out. But a funny thing happened in the context of then having watched In the Mood for Love. I've gone back and I've reassessed it, and I think you both have touched on this already, but where I previously allowed myself to indulge in the sort of whimsical romanticism of it all, as well as the mood and the atmosphere, now that I've seen In the Mood for Love, that film's kind of... It does the same thing, but it's more efficient at it, if that makes sense. It's kind of made me recalibrate my appreciation of this. So it's not that I like 2046 any less, but my viewpoint on it perhaps has changed, and I feel like this is... I was trying to think of how to articulate it earlier, and 2046 feels to me like if you took In the Mood for Love and you turned it all the way up to 11, basically, and it started clipping a bit, if that makes sense. And I don't like it any less now, but I just think my expectation, my understanding of how that mood and atmosphere can be facilitated has maybe been recalibrated somewhat. And yeah, cigarette paper between them. I've got a funny feeling that in the long game, if I revisit these movies again in a couple of years, that I will probably suggest that In the Mood for Love will come out on top.
I would imagine the same for myself, but again, it's like...
It's kind of like picking between your two children, you know.
This tremendously good film is slightly better than that tremendously good film.
Yeah.
I'm offended.
At a certain, yeah, exactly. At a certain point, guess what I'm going to do? Sit back and enjoy two tremendously good films. I think it's interesting that Christopher Doyle wasn't on board for this one. Because again, like the thing that captivated me... Oh, was he a cinematographer?
Yeah.
Oh.
Cinematographers. Christopher Doyle, Lai Yu-Fei, who shot Infernal Affairs, and a guy called Quan Ping Lung, who I don't know much about.
Oh, right, okay, because I hadn't bothered rereading the technicals on it since we came back to this. And when you said earlier, I don't think you mentioned Christopher Doyle before when you were talking about the cinematography, did you?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
I'm an idiot. There you go. Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you mention Christopher Doyle, and I'm kind of sitting here thinking, oh, that's interesting, man. I just assumed Christopher Doyle was on board for this one. So there you go. He was. So that explains it then. Yeah, this is just a film you can enjoy on multiple levels, and I don't think in terms of... well, obviously we can rule out plot because it's Wong Kar-wai, but in terms of character, it's maybe a step behind... In the Mood for Love, but aesthetically it's pretty much on a par. And honestly, I mean, when it comes to these two movies, like I can quite happily listen. I'll turn the sound down and I'll sit and enjoy both these movies with the sound off. I'll mute them and I'll enjoy them. It doesn't really matter. You can appreciate them purely on an aesthetic level, but to do so would be to miss out on the character. And I know this isn't as well regarded as some of his other works. I feel like when this first came out, there was actually a bit of a backlash against it. It was viewed as being substantially inferior to In the Mood for Love. Which obviously I had no benchmark for at the time, but it surprises me more even now because it is still a really great film. Really great film.